The room is quiet now, and somewhere beyond your window, a city keeps breathing in the dark. You let your shoulders sink, and you step with me into 1950s Los Angeles, not the movie version, not the gunfire and the glamour, the real one. Fluorescent lights that buzz like tired insects, coffee that's gone warm and stale, and a desk sergeant who knows every name and every bad habit. Tonight, you are the sleepless detective, moving slow through the small, ordinary work, reading yesterday's notes, listening to radios crackle softly, and learning how cases are built from patience. One careful detail at a time, until the paperwork starts to feel like a lullaby. You push the station door open, and the hinge complains in a familiar way. The air inside is cooler than the street, and it smells like paper, metal, and old smoke that never fully left. Behind the front counter, the night desk sergeant sits like a man welded to his chair. His tie is loosened, his sleeves are rolled, and his face says he has heard every excuse a person can invent. He does not ask who you are. That is the first lesson. In a place like this, everybody belongs to a drawer, a name, a badge number, a habit. You are either expected or you are trouble. And tonight, you are expected. He nods once toward the blotter, the big ledger where the city gets boiled down into lines of ink. Calls, complaints, accidents, arguments, things that start loud, then end quiet. You think detective work is chasing villains through alleys. Wrong. Detective work is reading what someone else wrote at 2 a.m. and spotting the one sentence that feels off. You slide onto a wooden chair that has learned the shape of tired bodies. You open the last shift's notes, and you read them like they are scripture, not because they are holy, because they are fragile. One missed detail, one sloppy time, and the whole case grows teeth later. The page is full of the ordinary. Domestic disturbance on Temple Street. Stolen bicycle near a schoolyard. A shopkeeper on Alameda who claims the same boy keeps testing the lock after closing. It is not glamorous. It is a city with its shoelaces untied, asking you to bend down and fix them. You learn the rhythm fast. Address, time, reporting party, officer assigned. Disposition. That last word is always trying to sound final. Disposition, as if the world is neat. But here is what you are really doing. You are building a map of human behavior. Most crimes are not puzzles. They are habits. The same family arguing the same way, the same drunk using the same corner, the same thief circling the same block because it feels easy. The sergeant clears his throat like a car engine that does not want to start. He points with a pencil that has been chewed down to nothing. You see it. A note from earlier, a burglary report that looks like a dozen others. Small grocery, back door forced, cash missing from the register, cigarettes gone. Nothing dramatic. But there is one line. The reporting officer wrote, almost as an afterthought, that the owner insisted the back door was locked, and the lock was not broken. No splintered wood, no bent metal, just open. Congratulations. You have found your first little stone in the shoe, the kind that does not hurt now, but will make you limp later. You read it again. You imagine the door. You imagine the owner standing there, waving his arms, angry at the universe. You imagine the officer, tired, wanting to get back to his car, riding fast. A back door that is open but not forced, that is not nothing, that is either carelessness or familiarity, and crimes love familiarity. They feed on it. The sergeant watches you with the patience of a man who has seen hundreds of new detectives try to sprint before they can walk. He does not smile. He just talks in a low voice like he is discussing the weather. In this town, he says, most of what you'll handle is people being people. Don't go looking for masterminds. Look for routines. You nod because you do not want to be the kind of detective who argues with a man who knows every bad habit. You take your pencil and you underline the line about the lock. Lightly. No drama. Just a mark that says, I see you. Then you turn the page. There are more notes. A missing person report. An older woman who did not come home from visiting her sister. A husband who swears she would never stay out. A neighbor who says she heard a car door at midnight. A patrol unit checked the sister's address and found nothing. The report sits there, incomplete, like a song that stops mid-chorus. You learn something else. Right here. In the quiet, the station does not solve everything in one night. It passes questions from one shift to the next, like a cigarette shared in the dark. You look around. The squad room is a long rectangle of desks and files. The walls have paint that has been cleaned too many times. A fan turns lazily, pushing warm air in slow circles. Somewhere down the hall, a typewriter starts up, then stops, then starts again. That is the real soundtrack of the job. Not sirens, keys. You stand and you take the notes with you. You are not racing anywhere. You are doing what detectives actually do. You are deciding what deserves your attention and what is just noise. And the hardest part is admitting how much of it is noise. You walk past the bulletin boards, wanted posters, sure, but also memos about proper report formatting, reminders to log evidence, notices about a retirement party that nobody will attend because they are working. A police station is half law, half paperwork, and the paperwork usually wins. A uniformed officer dozes in a chair, hat tipped forward, radio clipped to his shirt, like a sleeping insect. A phone rings once, then twice, then stops. Nobody rushes. If it is urgent, it will ring again. If it is not, it will be handled when it can be handled. That is how the night shift survives. You return to the front counter, and the desk sergeant slides a mug toward you without asking. The coffee is the color of old pennies. You take a sip, and it tastes like heat and regret. He speaks again, softer this time. You want to learn what the job is, he says. You ride. You listen. You watch who comes out of the dark. So you sign out, slow and proper, in the logbook. Your name goes down like a confession. Time out. Unit assigned. Destination. The city likes to know where you are. It does not always help, but it likes to know. Outside, the air is different. Los Angeles at night smells like damp asphalt and distant citrus. The streetlights cast pale circles on the sidewalk, and the shadows between them feel like gaps in memory. A heavy sedan waits at the curb. Big body, bench seat, steel that seems to weigh as much as the whole week. You get in, and the vinyl sticks faintly to your clothes. The engine rumbles like an old animal waking up. The patrolman behind the wheel does not talk much. He has the look of someone who has made peace with long hours. He drives with one hand resting on the wheel, the other near the radio, always ready to lift it and speak. You settle into the seat. and you feel every bump in the road. It is steady. It is almost comforting, like a metronome reminding you that time keeps going whether you solve anything or not. The radio crackles. A voice reads out an address in a calm tone, like ordering breakfast. Another voice answers, equally calm. No shouting, no drama, just information, moving from mouth to mouth. You learn quickly that the radio is not a conversation. It is a bloodstream. Short messages, delivered clean, because everyone is tired and everyone is listening. You roll past storefronts with their metal grates pulled down. You pass diners that never fully sleep, their windows fogged with steam and fluorescent glare. You pass dark houses with porch lights left on, small yellow eyes watching the street. Most calls are small problems. A couple arguing loud enough to wake the neighbors. A man who cannot find his wallet and thinks the universe owes him justice. A woman who heard footsteps in the alley and wants someone to confirm the world is still in order. You arrive at one apartment building where the hallway smells like boiled cabbage and old carpet. A woman in a robe stands with her arms crossed, talking fast. You do not interrupt her. You let her spill the whole story because half of police work is letting people empty themselves out. It turns out her neighbor's radio is too loud. Jazz, late at night, the kind of problem that will not make the papers. The patrolman knocks. A sleepy man opens the door, eyes half shut, hair standing up like a frightened cat. He apologizes. He turns the volume down. The woman in the robe exhales, as if a war has ended. You walk back to the car. No arrest, no handcuffs. Just a note on a pad. And you realize something, sitting there under the streetlight. This is not just crime. This is social maintenance. The city is a machine that shakes loose screws every day. You are here to tighten a few when you can. The radio crackles again. A call about a missing juvenile. Another about a suspicious vehicle parked behind a closed business. Another about an intoxicated man refusing to leave a bar. Each one is a thread. Most lead nowhere. Some lead to trouble. You do not know which until you follow them. You drive down streets that repeat. Same corner markets, same neon signs, same gas stations with bright lights that make the night look thin. You learn the city by repetition, not by romance, by routine. The patrolman points with his chin at a diner on a corner. That place, he says, they'll remember faces. They always do. Night people notice night people. You file that away. Waitresses and bartenders in this era are unofficial record keepers. They see who came in alone, who left in a hurry, who paid in cash, who paid with a shaky hand. They do it without trying. It is just survival. The radio calls you to a liquor store where the owner insists someone tried the door. You arrive, and the owner is waiting outside, coat buttoned wrong, eyes wide. He points at the lock like it insulted him. You inspect it. No damage. The owner shakes his head, sure of himself. He says he heard footsteps, heard the handle rattle. He is scared, but he is also angry. Fear often dresses up as anger, because anger feels stronger. The patrolman writes a short report. Time, address, owner's statement. No sign of forced entry. Advised to check locks. Suggested better lighting. The owner nods, but he does not look satisfied. You understand why. He wants certainty. He wants you to tell him the night is safe. But you cannot. You can only tell him what you saw. Back in the car, the patrolman sighs like a man trying not to become cynical. Half the city, he says, calls because they want to borrow your courage for a minute. You look out the window at the dark storefronts. You think about that burglary note, the back door that was open but not forced, and you begin to understand how a detective's mind changes. You stop looking for dramatic scenes. You start looking for the small places where reality does not fit. The radio is quiet for a few minutes, then it speaks again. Another address, a residence. A woman on the line, voice tight, says she found something and she does not know what to do with it. The patrolman glances at you. He does not need to say it. This one feels different. The car turns onto a street lined with small houses, each with a little lawn and a little fence. The kind of neighborhood that tries to look peaceful, even at midnight. The porch lights are dim. The windows are dark. Somewhere, a dog barks once, then stops, as if remembering it should not make noise. You park at the curb. You step out, and the air feels cooler here. Quieter. The quiet is heavier, like a blanket pulled too tight. A woman stands on the porch, hugging herself. She is not crying. Not yet. She looks like someone who has been holding her breath for a long time, and her body forgot how to let it out. You walk up the steps. Your shoes make soft sounds on the wood. You keep your voice low. You ask her to tell you what happened, from the beginning, in her own words. That is another lesson. People want to start with the worst part. You make them start earlier, not because you enjoy it, because truth has a timeline, and you cannot fix what you cannot place in order. She tells you she woke up to a noise in the back of the house. She thought it was the wind. She thought it was the plumbing. She tells you she got up, walked down the hallway, and saw the kitchen light on. She does not normally leave it on. When she stepped into the kitchen, she saw the back door open. Just a crack. She says she froze. She says she could smell cold air coming in. And something else, cigarette smoke, maybe, or something sour. She called out her husband's name. No answer. She called again. Still nothing. Then she saw it. A drawer pulled out. A chair moved slightly. A small mess that felt wrong in a room that usually behaves. You hear her words, and you feel your mind do what it always does. It starts sorting. Open door. Light on. Drawer open. Husband not answering. You do not run inside. Not yet. You step past her, and you pause at the threshold, like the house is a witness, and you do not want to spook it. You look down at the doorknob. You look at the latch. You look at the edge of the door where paint is chipped. Patience is not a virtue here. It is a tool. If you move too fast, you erase the story. Inside, the kitchen smells like dish soap and something metallic. The light overhead hums softly. A radio in another room is turned off, but you can almost hear its ghost. You look at the floor. Linoleum, clean mostly, but there are scuff marks near the back door, faint as pencil lines. Someone stepped in, shifted weight, stepped out, or someone was pulled. You do not touch anything. Not yet. The patrolman stands behind you, quiet, letting you look. He knows you are learning. He knows this is where detective work begins, not with action, but with observation. You scan the counters. A coffee tin, a bread box, a dish towel folded too neatly, as if someone was trying to pretend nothing happened. An ashtray by the sink, and in it, a cigarette butt that looks fresh. The woman said her husband smokes sometimes, but the brand is different, she says. She says he buys a cheaper kind. Congratulations, you have found another stone. You move slowly through the kitchen. The drawer is open. Inside are utensils, scattered, not ransacked exactly, more like searched by someone who did not know what they were looking for, or someone who did. You notice the phone on the wall. The cord hangs down like a tired rope. The receiver is in place. If someone had called, the woman might have heard it. If someone wanted to stop a call, they might have pulled the cord. But it is intact. You listen. Houses at night make small noises, pipes, wood settling, but you listen for something else. Movement where movement should not be. Nothing. You step into the hallway. The carpet is worn down the center from years of feet. Family life leaves tracks in fabric. The air here smells like powder and old perfume. You call out again, not loud, just enough. The husband's name. A question, not a command. No answer. You glance back at the woman on the porch. She is watching your face. She is trying to read the truth in your eyes before you speak it. You do not give her anything yet. Not because you are cruel, because you are careful. You move toward the back bedroom. The door is half open. The room is dim, lit only by the kitchen lights spilling down the hall. You stand in the doorway and look. The bed is made, but not perfectly. Someone got up, then lay back down, then got up again. There is a jacket on a chair. Shoes by the bed. On the dresser, a wallet lies open, empty. You feel the shape of the story trying to form. Burglary, maybe. But burglary is usually sloppy. Burglary is usually about speed. This feels personal, quiet, like someone who knew where to step. You step closer, and you see the window. It is closed. The curtain is pulled, but one corner is tucked behind the sill, like someone peeked out and forgot to fix it. You put your hand near the glass without touching it. The window is cold. It has been cold all night. You look at the floor near the window. No mud, no leaves, no obvious sign anyone came in that way. So why did the curtain move? You back out slowly, because backing out is sometimes smarter than going in. You return to the kitchen and finally allow yourself to touch one thing, the edge of the back door, gently with the side of your finger where prints might be. In the 1950s, fingerprint work exists, but it is slower than people imagine. Powder, tape, cards, a lab that may or may not have time tonight. You look at the latch again. No damage. The door could have been opened with a key, or from inside, the patrolman speaks quietly. Want me to call it in? You nod. He goes to the radio in the car, and his voice becomes one more calm sound in the night. He requests a unit. He requests a detective, if you are not already considered one for this moment. He requests, in that polite way police speak, permission for reality to get heavier. While he does that, you talk to the woman again. You ask her when she last saw her husband. She says, earlier in the evening. He came home from work. He ate dinner. He watched television. He went to bed. She says nothing seemed wrong. You ask if anyone has keys besides them. She hesitates. She says her sister used to, but she thinks she returned it. She says the neighbor watched the house once when they traveled. She says the landlord might have one, but they own the house, so no. You ask about friends, family, anyone who might come by late. She shakes her head. Then she pauses, and you see her mind snag on something. She says there is a man from her husband's job who visited last week, a co-worker. They talked in the living room, voices low. She did not catch the name. You do not react too strongly, but inside, you circle it. Low voices, unknown name. A visit? That could be nothing, or it could be everything. You ask her about money, cash in the house. She says her husband keeps some in a tin in the kitchen. She checks. The tin is still there. It still has bills inside. So what was taken? The patrolman returns. Detective unit is on the way, he says. They'll want the house left as is. You nod. Of course they will. That is the rule, even when people hate it. You do not tidy a crime scene. You do not make it comfortable. You let it stay ugly and honest. The woman looks past you into her own kitchen like she is looking at a stranger wearing her curtains. She whispers almost to herself, Is he gone? You answer carefully. You do not tell her a story. You tell her what you know. You tell her you have not found him in the house. You tell her you are going to keep looking properly, with more people, with better light. You do not say the words she fears. You let time hold them back, and then, while you wait for the detective unit, you do what the job really is. You stand still. You listen. You look. You write notes in a small pad. Because memory is a liar, especially at night. You write down the time. You write down the smell of smoke. You write down the cigarette butt. You write down the curtain corner. You write down the open wallet. You write down the tin of cash untouched. All of it is small. All of it is quiet. All of it might matter later when someone is sitting under a slow fan, swearing they never stepped foot in this house. The detective unit arrives without drama. Another car, another set of tired faces. A man in a rumpled suit steps out, coat hanging open. He carries a flashlight even though the porch light is on. He has the look of someone who has learned not to trust bright things. He nods at you, then at the patrolman. He does not ask for feelings. He asks for facts. What time? Who called? What did you see? What did you touch? Did anyone else enter? You answer in the same low tone. You keep it clean. This is not storytelling. This is building a record. The detective steps inside, and his flashlight beam moves over the floor like a slow finger. He crouches near the back door. He looks at the scuff marks. He looks at the latch. He looks at the ashtray. He glances at you. You notice the brand. He says, you tell him, different brand than the husband's usual. The woman's statement. The fresh look of the butt. He grunts. That is his version of approval. Another officer arrives with a camera. In the 1950s, crime scene photography is not sleek. It is methodical. Bulky equipment, flashbulbs that pop bright, then fade. The photographer moves carefully, taking pictures of ordinary corners like they are famous faces. You watch that process, and you understand how much of justice is just documentation. A crime scene does not last. People move. Dust settles. Smells fade. But photographs and reports remain. They become the only way to show a jury what the night looked like. The detective asks the woman more questions. He is not cruel, but he is firm. He asks about enemies, affairs, debts. He asks about her husband's schedule, his habits, his drinking, his temper. The woman looks offended at some of it, and then she looks scared because she realizes why he is asking. A missing man is not just missing. Not at night. Not with an open door. You stand to the side, listening, watching how he does it. He does not accuse. He lets her talk. When she tries to jump ahead, he pulls her back to the beginning. Time is everything. People lie best when they can skip around. In a corner of the kitchen, the photographer takes a close picture of the ashtray, another of the drawer, another of the latch. The flashbulbs pop with soft little explosions, bright and brief. You think again about what people imagine. They imagine detectives solving cases by intuition. They do not imagine this. A tired man crouched on linoleum, staring at a cigarette butt like it owes him money. But this is where cases are actually built, slowly, carefully, with details that do not sparkle. The detective stands and makes a decision. He tells the patrolman to check nearby streets for the husband's car. He tells another officer to call. He tells someone else to check with the husband's employer in the morning. And then he looks at you again. You, he says, you stay with the notes. I want a clean report. Exact words, exact times. There it is, your assignment. Not a chase, not a confrontation. The job that decides whether anything holds up later. You step outside with your pad, and you stand under the porch light. The night air feels damp now. A car passes at the end of the block, headlights sweeping across lawns like slow searchlights. In the distance, you hear a train horn, low and mournful. You begin to write. You write the woman's name, the address, the time of the call. You write her description of the kitchen light, the open door, the smell. You write what you observed, and you separate it from what she believes. That separation is sacred, observed, reported, inferred. A detective learns to keep those lanes clean. You write about the cigarette butt, and you note the brand, because brands are tiny fingerprints people forget they leave behind. In the 1950s, cigarette brands are common, but they still narrow things. A certain kind of man smokes a certain kind, a certain job, a certain taste, a certain budget. You write about the curtain because curtains do not move themselves, not usually. And when they do, the reason is simple, and simple reasons are often the best ones. The detective comes back out after a while, and he rubs his eyes with his thumb and forefinger. He looks down the street like he is trying to see through time. It might be nothing, he says, and his tone tells you it might not be. That is another lesson. Detectives speak in maybes because the world is made of maybes. Certainty is rare, and when someone offers it too quickly, you suspect they are selling something. He tells the woman they will keep looking. He tells her to stay with family if she can. He tells her not to clean anything. He tells her to call if she remembers any names from the husband's job. The woman nods like a person underwater, hearing voices through glass. You return to the car with your notes. The patrolman drives you back toward the station. The radio crackles with other small troubles, unrelated. The city does not pause for one missing man, and you sit there, feeling the weight of what you saw, not the drama, but the quiet wrongness of a kitchen light left on. Back at the station, The fluorescent lights buzz, the same tired buzz. The desk sergeant is still there, still holding the fort like a man guarding a lighthouse. He looks up as you enter, and he can tell by your face that you have brought the night back with you. He does not ask for the whole story. He asks one question, practical and plain. You write it down. You lift your pad slightly. Yes, you wrote it down. He nods. Good, he says, because tomorrow everybody forgets. Even you. You walk to a desk and you sit down in front of a typewriter that looks like it has been punched in the gut 1,000 times. The keys are worn smooth. The ribbon is tired. The carriage return lever waits like a little metal arm offering you work. You place your notes beside the machine and you start to type. The sound is steady. Click, click, click. In the quiet squad room, it is almost soothing. A percussion of facts, a slow march of sentences. You learn right here how much detective work is writing. Not beautiful writing, useful writing. Dates, times, names, who said what, who stood where, what the light looked like, what the air smelled like. You make it plain so someone else can follow it later, like a map drawn in the dark. You type the address carefully. You type the woman's statement as close to her words as you can manage. You do not clean up her grammar. You do not improve her sentences. People speak the way they speak. That matters. You type your observations in a separate section. Open back door. No visible forced entry. Cigarette butt present. In ashtray. Brand appears different from husband's usual per reporting party. Kitchen drawer open, contents disturbed. Wallet empty on dresser. Cash tin untouched. You pause between lines, letting the carriage sit still for a breath. Then you continue. The office smells like ink and dust and cigarettes. Somewhere, a man laughs quietly at something someone said. Then the laughter dies because it feels disrespectful in a building full of other people's problems. You keep typing. You keep it simple. You keep it clean. And this is where the job becomes boring in the most important way. No adrenaline, no soundtrack, just accuracy. You finish the first page and you pull it out with a soft rip. You stack it neatly because paperwork is fragile pride. You start another page because reports always take longer than you think they will. As you type, you think about how cases in the 1950s get solved. Not with computers, not with instant databases. If you want to know if the husband has been arrested before, you ask records. If you want to know if he owns a car, you check motor vehicle files. If you want to find his coworker, you call the employer and hope someone picks up. Everything takes time. Time is the currency. And criminals, most of them, are not geniuses. They are just people hoping time will blur what they did. But the report fights that blur. The report freezes the night. It pins it down like a specimen. You realize why old detectives love their notebooks. Not because they are sentimental, because memory is the first thing that betrays you. Memory takes the sharp edges off. Memory fills gaps with guesses. A notebook does not. You type until your fingers feel stiff. You roll your shoulders once, then go back to it. You check your spelling of names. You check the time again. You make sure you wrote down the brand correctly. Because later, someone will ask, a supervisor, a prosecutor, a defense attorney, a judge. Someone will look at this paper and decide whether it is solid or whether it is a mess. You hand the report to the desk sergeant when it is done. He reads it, not like a reader, but like a mechanic listening to an engine. He is listening for loose parts. He points at one line and asks, "You sure you didn't touch the ashtray?" You answer honestly, "No, you did not touch it. You only observed." He nods and makes a small note in the log. The report disappears into the station's slow digestive system, where it will become a file, then a folder, then a box. You sit back down and you realize something else about the 1950s. Evidence does not float in the cloud. It sits in rooms, on shelves, in envelopes, in drawers. It can be lost. It can be mislabeled. It can be misplaced behind something else and forgotten, like a coat left at a party. So the station tries, in its weary way, to be organized. The property clerks are the librarians of the ugly truth. They keep order so the rest of you can pretend the world is trackable. The desk sergeant tells you, with a tilt of his head, that you should go see it. Not the glamour, the quiet place where the city's mistakes are boxed up. You walk down a hallway that narrows, then turns. The lighting changes, becoming harsher, more clinical. The sound of the station fades behind you, replaced by a hush that feels like you are walking into a church that worships paperwork. A door opens onto the evidence area. Metal shelving, cardboard boxes, sealed envelopes, tags with handwritten numbers. The smell is different here. Not blood and gunpowder like people imagine, but dust and tape and old leather. A property clerk looks up from a desk. He has ink on his fingers. He has a calm face, like nothing surprises him anymore. He checks your badge, checks a log, and gestures you in. You walk slowly between shelves. You see watches and little bags, keys, wallets, rings, a child's shoe, a stack of letters tied with string. Every object looks innocent on its own. Together, they feel like a museum of interrupted lives. The clerk speaks softly, like he is in a library. Most of it, he says, is small. People expect big guns, big knives. Most of it is receipts, cigarette butts, buttons. He reaches up and taps a box. That, he says, is from a burglary last month. They took a radio. We kept the broken window latch because the latch tells the story. You think about your kitchen scene, the open back door, the unbroken lock, the cigarette butt. Those are the kinds of things that end up here, bagged, labeled, waiting for someone to need them. You look at a row of envelopes marked with case numbers. Each one is a promise that someone tried to be careful. Each one is also a warning that care is never perfect. The clerk shows you the intake process. Evidence gets tagged, logged, sealed, signed for, stored. Chain of custody, they call it, a fancy phrase for a simple idea. If you cannot prove where an item has been, someone will argue it was planted, or swapped, or contaminated. You nod because you can already hear a defense attorney's voice in your head. Smooth, confident, asking, "And who had access to this room, officer?" The clerk tells you access is limited. Keys are controlled, logs are kept, but he says it in a tone that admits the truth. Nothing is perfect. It is just better than chaos. You walk along the shelves a little longer, taking it in. A city's crimes reduced to objects. It is strangely quiet, almost gentle. That is the trick of evidence. It looks harmless, even when it is not. And as you turn back toward the hallway, you carry that thought with you that answers often come from the smallest item someone almost ignored. And once you have seen how the station keeps its secrets on metal shelves, you start to understand what comes next. Knocking on doors, asking simple questions, and listening longer than feels natural. You take the long way out of the evidence room because that is how the building teaches you to move. Slow, deliberate, never like you are in a hurry to touch the world. The hallway smells like floor wax and old radiator heat, and it carries sound in a strange way. A cough from 2 doors down arrives at your ears like it has paperwork attached. Somewhere behind you, a metal shelf makes a tiny ping as it settles, like even the storage is shifting in its sleep. You come back into the squad room with that evidence room feeling still on your clothes, like dust that does not brush off. And now you get handed the part of the job nobody puts on a poster. You get handed names, not suspects, not villains, just names. Neighbors, co-workers, relatives, landlords, the kind of people who are one door away from a story. You take your notebook, your pencil, and your best polite face. You do not take a gun out of the holster, because this is not that kind of work. This is the kind of work where the weapon is your patience. You step back out into the city, and the night air catches you in the throat. Los Angeles has a particular smell after midnight: damp concrete, hot oil cooling in restaurant vents, and a faint sweetness from trees that were planted to make the place feel like paradise. Congratulations, you are about to learn that paradise has thin walls. You start where detectives usually start because it is the least dramatic and the most effective. Next door. The first doorstep is a small stucco house with a porch light that hums. You can hear an electric buzz inside the fixture, a tiny insect trapped behind glass. You knock gently, not the kind of knock that says trouble, the kind that says inconvenience. A man opens the door halfway, chain still on. He is wearing an undershirt, hair mashed flat on one side. He looks at your badge like it is a stain he hopes will wash out. You keep your voice low. You tell him you are checking on something that happened nearby. You ask if he heard anything unusual tonight. He blinks slowly, like you asked him to do math in his sleep. He says no. He says he went to bed early. He says he has work in the morning. This is where you learn the first rule of doorstep questions. People do not lie dramatically. They lie economically. They lie to protect their rest, their routine, their sense that the world is still under control. So you do not push hard. You shift the question sideways. You ask if he heard a car door. You ask if he heard a dog barking. You ask if he noticed any lights coming on or going off at odd times. Now he pauses, just a fraction. His eyes move left, then right, like he is searching the dark hallway behind your shoulder for an answer. He says there was a car, maybe, around midnight. He is not sure. He says it could have been the newspaper boy, even though it is too early for that. He says it could have been anyone. You nod, and you write down what he said. You do not write down what you wish he said. You keep the words plain, because plain words hold up better later. You thank him because you need him to keep talking to you tomorrow, and you step away before he can decide to shut down completely. On the next porch, a woman answers in a robe, eyes sharp and awake like she has been waiting for noise all night. Some people sleep with one ear open. Some people sleep with both eyes open too. She sees the badge, and she does not look scared. She looks interested. She has the look of someone who collects information the way other people collect stamps. You ask your questions, and she answers them with too much confidence. Yes, she heard something. Yes, she saw something. She says there was a man on the sidewalk earlier, and he looked suspicious. She says a car drove by slowly, like it was casing the street. She says she told her husband the neighborhood is going downhill. You listen because you have to. And because sometimes, under the dramatic phrasing, there is a real detail hiding like a coin in couch cushions. So, you do what you learn to do. Ask the same thing 3 ways. You ask what time. She gives you a range, too wide. You ask what the man looked like. She gives you a description that could fit half the city. You ask which direction the car went. She points vaguely, like direction is a feeling. This is not useless, exactly. It tells you what kind of witness she is. She is a mood witness, not a fact witness. She will remember the sense of wrongness, not the specifics. You write it down anyway, and you mark it in your mind as what it is. Human noise, may be helpful later, maybe not. You keep moving, because door knocking is like fishing with a small net. You cover ground. You pick up what you can. You do not fall in love with any one catch. At a small apartment building, the hallway smells like soup and cigarettes, and your footsteps echo off the tile like you are walking inside a coffee can. You knock on a door with peeling paint around the frame. A chain rattles. A face appears. A young man, maybe late 20s, eyes tired, shirt buttoned wrong. He looks past you, down the hall, as if expecting someone else to be there too. You ask if he heard anything tonight. He says no, and then he adds, too quickly, that he does not get involved in other people's business. Congratulations, you have found the kind of person who has seen something or thinks he has. You soften your tone, not because you feel soft, but because the job requires it. You tell him you are not asking him to get involved. You tell him you are just trying to make sure nobody else gets hurt. He swallows. His eyes flick down to your notebook, then back to your face. He says he heard a car stop out front earlier. He says he heard voices, not shouting, just low, tight voices like people trying not to wake anyone. He says it lasted less than a minute, then a car door, then the engine. You ask what time. He shrugs. He says around midnight, maybe later. He says he was half asleep. He says he does not know if it matters. You tell him it matters enough to write down. Then you ask what kind of car. He pauses again. He says he thinks it was dark. He says it sounded heavy. He says he heard a squeak, like a door hinge that needs oil. He says that squeak is what woke him up. That detail, small, irritating, mechanical, is the kind you keep. A squeaky door is a signature people do not mean to leave. It is like humming while you work. You do it without thinking, and then someone remembers. You thank him. You ask his name. He gives it reluctantly, like it costs him something. You write it down. Outside again, you feel the night wrap around you. The street is calm, but the calm is not reassurance. It is just what the world looks like before someone decides to break it. You keep going. You knock on more doors. You get more versions of the same thing. People who are asleep. People who are watching television. People who are reading or drinking or arguing. People who heard nothing, saw nothing, know nothing. People who want you to tell them it is all fine. In the 1950s, neighbors are closer than they pretend to be. They share walls, they share lawns, they share the sound of each other's lives through open windows. But closeness does not guarantee honesty. Sometimes it just guarantees better excuses. You learn to listen for the tiny flaws in a story, not because you want to accuse everyone, but because you want to know which memories are anchored to something real. A woman says she heard footsteps, but when you ask her where she was standing, she cannot tell you. A man says he went to bed at 10, but there is a coffee cup on his porch railing still warm from a late cigarette. You do not call him on it. You just note it. Because maybe he is lying, or maybe he is embarrassed. And embarrassment makes people strange. You walk up one last set of steps, and the porch boards creak under your shoes. You knock, and the door opens almost immediately. A middle-aged man stands there, fully dressed, tie loosened. He has not been asleep at all. His eyes are red, like he has been staring at something too long. He looks at you, and he says your name, even though you did not introduce yourself. That gets your attention. He says he works with the missing husband. He says he was just about to call the station. He says he heard about it from someone who heard it from someone else. News travels in neighborhoods like spilled water. You ask him how he knows your name. He gestures behind him, toward a kitchen table covered with papers. He says he has had to talk to police before. He says you were mentioned in the office when someone needed a report done right. It is an odd compliment, and it sits wrong in your stomach. You ask him to start from the beginning. He invites you in, and his house smells like aftershave and cold coffee. There is a radio playing softly in another room, some late-night program with a voice that sounds too cheerful for the hour. He tells you the missing husband, his coworker, had been acting nervous lately. He says the man mentioned a debt, not a bank loan, something private. He says there were phone calls at work, short ones. A man's voice on the other end, quiet but sharp. You ask if he knows who it was. He shakes his head. He says the caller never identified himself. He says the missing man would take the call in the hallway, away from desks. You ask about visitors. The coworker nods, slowly. He says there was a man who came by the shop last week. He says the man wore a neat coat, like a salesman, and he carried himself like he owned the air around him. He says he asked for the missing husband by name. You feel your pencil pause. A man asking by name is not random trouble. That is directed. You ask what the visitor looked like, and this time you get something useful. A scar near the jaw, a hat with a narrow brim, a voice that sounded educated but impatient. You ask why the coworker did not report this earlier. He looks down at his hands. He says he did not think it mattered. He says he did not want trouble at the workplace. He says he has a family. There it is again. People protecting their peace like it is the only currency that matters. You write it down. Anyway, you write the scar, the hat, the impatience. Then you ask the question that always feels too direct on a living room couch. Did the missing husband have enemies? The coworker exhales through his nose. He says the man had a temper, but not the kind that starts fights in bars. He says the missing husband was the kind that keeps score, the kind that remembers small humiliations and carries them like stones in a pocket. That kind of person makes enemies without trying. Just by being themselves, you thank the coworker and you stand to leave. He follows you to the door, and he hesitates, like he wants to say one more thing but is afraid of what it means. You wait. Silence is a tool, and it is often sharper than a question. He finally speaks. He says the missing husband mentioned a place, a diner, not far from the shop. He says the man went there a couple of nights ago, late, and came back pale. He said he met someone there, someone who asked for money or asked for something else. You ask the name of the diner. The coworker tells you, and you write it down like it is a key. Outside, the night is turning thinner. Not dawn yet, but the air has that pre-morning chill, like the city is about to wake and pretend it never sleeps. You take your notes back toward the station, because that is how it works. You collect little pieces of human memory, then you carry them into fluorescent light and try to make them fit together without cutting yourself. Back at your desk, you lay the notebook open and stare at the page. Names and times. Scar near the jaw, narrow brim hat, a squeaky car door, low voices around midnight, an open back door with no forced entry, a cigarette butt of the wrong brand. If you try to force it into a story too soon, you will ruin it. The job is not to invent a narrative. The job is to keep the facts in a row until they start to lean toward something. So, you do the boring thing again. You organize. You take a fresh sheet of paper and you start listing addresses, witness names, statements. You separate what someone actually saw from what they assumed. Heard car door is different from saw man. Smelled smoke is different from saw cigarette. You make those distinctions because later, someone will try to blur them on purpose. You also learn what 1950s detective work cannot do quickly. You cannot pull up a driver's license photo on a screen. You cannot run a name through a national database in seconds. You can call records, and records can pull a card, and that card can tell you if someone has been arrested in this city. Not if they have been arrested in another county. Not unless you make more calls and wait. So you make calls. You ask records to check the missing husband's file, if any. You ask for his address history, if they have it. You ask for any known associates. You learn to say please, not because you are polite, but because the person on the other end controls your timeline. You call the missing man's employer, even though it is late and you know nobody will answer. You leave a message with whoever is still there. You ask for time cards. You ask for a list of coworkers. You ask if anyone has seen that visitor with the scar. You also call hospitals, because that is what you do when someone is missing and the night is full of sharp corners. Hospitals have their own bureaucracy. Someone checks a list, someone asks you to hold, the line clicks and hums, and you stare at your desk while time moves in slow, unhelpful circles. No John Doe matching the description. Not yet. You write that down too. Then, because the coworker gave you a name you can actually walk into, you decide you are going to that diner. Not right now, not in a rush, because rushing makes mistakes. But soon. The next part of the job is also a quiet ritual. You go back into the evidence room, not to admire it this time, but to ask the property clerk a simple question: what cigarette brand was recovered from that kitchen ashtray, and can it be logged properly, if it was not already? The clerk checks the intake sheet. He tells you they bagged it. He tells you it will be sent to the lab if requested, but the lab is backed up because the lab is always backed up. He tells you tobacco can sometimes be traced by brand and paper, but in this era, it is not magic. There is no instant match. There is just comparison and waiting. You nod. You ask him to keep it safe. He gives you a look that says, that is his whole life. You leave again, and as you walk the hallway back, you realize how much of your work depends on other tired people doing their work correctly. The clerk, the lab technician, the typist, the patrolman who wrote the first note. The chain is only as strong as the most bored link. Congratulations! Your case is now a group project. By late night into early morning, the neighborhood interviews slow down. People stop answering doors. Lights go off. The city decides it has given you enough. Your shoes feel heavier, and your notebook has that worn warmth from your hand. You have enough to start the next step, finding the places where people talk when they think nobody official is listening. And in Los Angeles, there is always a place like that open. You drive toward the diner name the coworker gave you. The streets are quieter now, but not empty. Delivery trucks hum along. A bus passes, nearly vacant, its interior lights making it look like an aquarium drifting through the dark. When you pull up to the diner, it looks exactly like every working-class promise in the city. Neon sign buzzing softly, one letter slightly dimmer than the rest. Large front windows fogged with steam. Inside, bright light, hard and honest, showing you everything you might rather not see. Tired faces, greasy plates, a man asleep in a booth with his hat still on. You walk in, and the bell above the door makes a small sound. Not cheerful, more like it is clearing its throat. The air hits you. Coffee, fried onions, bleach from the mop bucket, and that permanent undertone of cigarette smoke soaked into vinyl seats. It is warm inside, almost too warm, and your skin notices the change. A waitress looks up from behind the counter. Her hair is pinned up, lipstick still on even at this hour. She has the steady eyes of someone who has watched people lie to themselves over pie. You take a seat where you can see the door and most of the room. You do not sit with your back to the window because you like to keep your habits consistent. She pours you coffee without asking. It lands in front of you like a sentence. You ask, gently, if she remembers the missing man. You use his name and you watch her face. Her eyes narrow a fraction. Recognition, not surprise. She says yes. He comes in sometimes, late. She says he has a certain way of stirring his coffee, too fast, like he is trying to erase something. You ask if she remembers him being here a couple nights ago, late. She leans her elbows on the counter, not in a friendly way, more like she is settling in for a story she already knows the ending to. She says yes. He was here. He was not alone. You keep your voice calm. You ask who he was with. She says she does not know the man's name, but she remembers the details that matter to a waitress. She remembers what he ordered. She remembers how he held his cigarette. She remembers that he paid in cash, crisp bills, like he wanted no trace. You ask what he looked like. She says narrow brim hat, neat coat, scar near the jaw. Your pencil moves across the page without hesitation. The same description. 2 sources now. Still not proof, but it is shape. You ask what they talked about. She gives you a look like you asked her to recite a prayer she was not taught. She says she did not hear words, not clearly. The diner has clatter, plates, a jukebox in the back corner, softly playing something sad. But she saw their body language. She says, The scarred man leaned forward. The missing husband leaned back. She says the missing man kept glancing at the door, like he expected someone else. She says at one point, the missing man put his hand to his mouth, like he felt sick. She says they left separately. The scarred man left first. The missing man stayed behind, paid for his own coffee, and sat staring into the cup for a long time. Then he left too. You ask which direction he went. She nods toward the street outside. She says he walked to his car. She says he paused, as if deciding something. Then he drove off. Slow. You take a sip of coffee. It tastes burned and reliable. You ask the waitress if she noticed any car near the diner that night. Any vehicle waiting, any man sitting inside, she thinks. You let the silence stretch, because silence gives memory room to stand up. She says there was a dark sedan parked near the side, engine idling for a while. She remembers because the exhaust made a thin cloud against the window, and it annoyed her. She says she saw a man in the driver's seat, but she could not see his face. You write it down. Then you ask the waitress something you know she can answer better than most police reports. You ask if the missing man seemed scared. She does not hesitate. She says yes. She says he looked like a man who had already decided he was going to lose. That is the kind of sentence that sticks to you. You thank her and you leave a tip, because that is how you keep the city talking to you. You do not pay for information, not officially, but you respect the time people spend remembering for you. You respect the risk. In a place like this, being helpful can make you a target for someone else's anger. Outside again, the street feels colder. The neon buzz follows you like a mosquito. You walk back to your car and you think about what you have. You have a man with a scar who appears in the missing man's life. You have money mentioned, debt hinted. You have an open back door with no forced entry. You have a wrong cigarette brand in the ashtray. You have a squeaky car door, heard by a neighbor. None of it is cinematic. All of it is the way real cases actually move. One small fact at a time, dragging its feet. You take this back to the station. You put it into another report. You file it where someone else can find it in 6 months if the case goes cold and then warms up again. Because that happens too. Cases do not die, they just go quiet. In the days that follow, because cases are almost never a single night, you do more of the same. You talk to more coworkers. You talk to relatives. You stand on more porches and ask if anyone saw a dark sedan. You start noticing how often people remember cars better than faces. Cars are easier. Cars have shape and sound. Faces blur when fear is involved. You also learn the other half of late-night hangouts. Bars, not glamorous cocktail lounges with jazz and chandeliers. The working bars. The ones that smell like beer spilled into old wood. The ones with a tired bartender wiping the same glass over and over, like repetition can scrub the night clean. You step into one, and the air is thick. Ceiling fan turning slowly, pushing smoke around like a lazy hand. A few men at the bar, shoulders hunched, not talking much. A woman in a booth, staring at nothing. The bartender looks up. He clocks you immediately. In this era, the badge has weight, not always respect, but weight. You order coffee if they have it, or you order something small you can nurse. You do not come in loud. You do not come in like you own the place. You come in like you are just another tired man, looking for a warm corner. Then, you ask your questions. Have you seen this man? Narrow brim hat, scar near the jaw. The bartender squints, then shrugs. He says, "Scars are common." He says, "Hats are common." He says, "Men come in here to disappear, not to be remembered." So you adjust. You ask about cigarette brands. You ask if anyone here smokes the expensive kind, the kind you saw in that ashtray. In the 1950s, a cigarette brand can say class, can say taste, can say what kind of paycheck a man brings home. The bartender nods toward a corner. A man sitting alone, cigarette between two fingers, holding it like it is part of his identity. You do not go over like an interrogator. You go over like a man asking for directions. You ask the man what he smokes. He tells you, defensive. You ask if he knows anyone else who smokes it. He says maybe, lots of people. Then he adds, casually, that a guy named Leon used to smoke those before switching to something cheaper. A name. Finally, not the scarred man yet, but a name that could connect. You write it down. Leon. You ask for a last name. The man shrugs. He says he does not know. He says Leon comes in sometimes. Likes to talk big. Likes to borrow money. Borrow money. There it is again, like a song chorus. You ask what Leon looks like. The man says neat coat, narrow brim hat. He says he has a scar. Congratulations, you have just learned that the scar is not a dramatic detail. It is a handle you can grab. You keep the conversation soft. You ask when Leon was last here. The man says, a couple of nights ago. Late. He came in with another guy, but they did not sit together. They sat apart, like they were pretending not to know each other. The man says Leon left early. The other guy stayed and drank too much. You ask who the other guy was. The man says he thinks it was the missing husband. He says he has seen him before. Looks like a working man trying to act tougher than he feels. You thank him. You do not stay too long. Bars have their own gravity. And if you linger, you start attracting attention you do not want. Back at the station, you take that name, Leon, and you do what detectives in this era do with names. You go to the files, paper files, card files, drawers that squeal when you pull them out, the smell of old ink and metal. You ask records to check Leon, maybe last name unknown, scar, possible extortion. They ask you for more. You give them what you have. They sigh because vague descriptions make extra work. But eventually, a clerk finds something. A card with a Leon who has been arrested before. Not for murder. Not for anything that makes headlines. For loan sharking, maybe. For assault. For carrying a weapon. The kind of man who lives in the margins between legal and illegal, where money is always involved. The last name matches what the coworker thought he heard in the shop. Half spoken, half swallowed. Now you have a full name. Not proof, but something you can knock on. This is the slow art of detective work, turning a rumor into a record, turning a record into a person, turning a person into an interview. And interviews in the 1950s have a particular sound. A small room, a slow fan, a chair scraping on linoleum, water in a paper cup, offered like a peace treaty. But you are not there yet. Before you can put a man in a chair, you have to know where he sleeps. So you do more paperwork, more calls, more waiting. You get an address for Leon from the last arrest record. It might be old. These men move. They always move. But it is a start. You drive there in the afternoon because you do not always catch people at night. Sometimes you catch them when they are tired in daylight, when they cannot hide behind darkness. The building is a cheap rooming house, paint flaking, stairs worn smooth. The hallway smells like sweat and cooking oil. A radio plays somewhere behind a door, too loud, like someone is trying to drown out their own thoughts. You knock on the door listed for Leon. No answer. You knock again, and you hear movement, a shuffle, a pause. Then the door opens a crack. A chain holds it. A man's face appears, eyes sharp, jaw tight, and yes, there is a scar, pale against his skin like an old memory. You introduce yourself. You keep it simple. You say you are investigating a missing person. You say you would like to ask a few questions. He smiles slightly. It is the smile of a man who has practiced being untouchable. He says he does not know anything about missing persons. He says he does not get involved. He says, you have the wrong man. You ask if he knows the missing husband by name. He says no, too fast. You let the silence hang for a moment, and you watch his throat move as he swallows. You ask if he was at the diner a couple nights ago. He says he does not eat at diners. He says he cooks at home. He says you have witnesses who lie. This is where you learn the ordinary sound of deception. It is not dramatic. It is not sweating and shouting. It is a man answering questions like he is swatting flies. Quick, annoyed, dismissive. You do not accuse him yet. You do not call him a liar, because that only makes him shut the door harder. Instead, you do the boring thing. You ask for his schedule, where he was that night, who he was with, what time he went to sleep. He gives you an alibi that sounds too smooth. He says he was home all evening. He says he read the paper. He says he went to bed early. You nod, like you accept it. Then you ask a small question. What did you read in the paper? He hesitates. Not long. Just long enough. He says sports. He says politics. He says the usual. Congratulations. He just gave you nothing. And nothing is suspicious when someone is trying too hard. You thank him politely. You tell him you may be back with more questions. You tell him if he remembers anything, he can call the station. He says sure, and the chain rattles as the door closes. You stand in the hallway, listening to the lock click. You look at your notebook, and you write down what matters. He denied knowing the missing man. He denied being at the diner. He provided an alibi with no anchor, no mention of a time-specific event, no mention of a friend, no mention of a place with a witness. Alibis in this era are physical. A bus transfer, a time card, a bartender who remembers, a neighbor who saw you on the porch. If you say you were home alone, you are telling the world you want your story to be uncheckable. It is not proof, but it is a smell. That sour little smell that tells you something is off. Back at the station, you lay your notes on the desk and start building the timeline properly, because that is the only way to keep your mind from running in circles. Last known normal evening, dinner, television, bed. Then the wife wakes to noise, finds kitchen light on, back door open, husband missing, wallet empty, but cash tin untouched, cigarette butt wrong brand. Neighbor hears car door low voices near midnight. Coworker says debt and calls. Waitress says meeting with Leon. Bar patron says Leon was around, possibly with missing husband. Now you circle the locations on a paper map, not a digital map, a real one. Folding creases, worn edges, the city laid out like a patient on a table. You mark the house, you mark the diner, you mark the bar, you mark Leon's rooming house. The marks are closer than you expected. Cases do that. They feel huge until you put them on paper, and then you realize the whole tragedy could fit inside a short drive and a few bad decisions. You also realize something quietly unsettling. The back door, no forced entry. If the missing man opened it, he opened it for someone he recognized, or someone who sounded like they belonged. A coworker, a neighbor, a man who had already sat across from him in a diner booth. That is how most violence gets in. Not kicking down a door, just being invited. You sit back and the chair creaks under you like it is also tired of this. Then comes the next step that never feels like the movies. You start calling for verification. You call the diner, ask if the waitress is working again, ask if she can identify Leon from a photograph. In the 1950s, you pull photographs from paper files, mug shots printed, sometimes blurry, sometimes too stark. You bring them in person if you have to. You call the bar, ask the bartender about Leon, see if he will admit anything when the sun is up and the place smells less like secrets. You call the missing husband's employer for time cards. You ask if the missing husband left early. You ask if Leon ever came by or if anyone matching his description did. This is all slow. It is phone calls and waiting and being told to call back. It is also the part of the job where you can feel your own mind trying to speed up, trying to jump to an ending. You refuse. You keep it steady. Because rushing is how you arrest the wrong man, and the wrong arrest is a bruise that never fully heals. Eventually, you get what you can. The employer confirms the visitor. Yes, a man matching Leon's description came by asking for the missing husband. The employer did not get his name. Why would he? In a shop, strangers come and go. The waitress, when shown a photograph later, points without hesitation. That is him, scar and all. Now Leon is no longer a shadow. He is a man with a record and a face and a reason to be nervous. So you bring him in, not with sirens, not with drama. You go back to the rooming house with another detective because interviews go smoother when you are not alone. The manager of the rooming house complains, as managers do. He says he does not want trouble. You tell him trouble already rented a room. Leon is there this time. He opens the door with the chain off, like he wants to show confidence. He steps back and lets you in, which is both an invitation and a performance. You sit in a chair by his small table. The room smells like stale smoke and cheap cologne. There is a suitcase half packed in the corner. Congratulations. He was thinking about leaving. You do not mention the suitcase. Not yet. You ask basic questions again. You give him the chance to repeat his lies, because repeated lies get sloppy. Where were you 2 nights ago? What did you do? Who did you see? He tells the same story. Home all evening, bed early. Then you lay one fact on the table, gentle as a napkin. You say you have a witness placing him at the diner with the missing man. He laughs, a short bark. He says witnesses are unreliable. He says waitresses will say anything. He says you are wasting time. You nod, like you agree, like you are also bored. Then you lay down the next fact. You say another witness saw him at the bar later. The laughter stops. His eyes narrow. He shifts his weight in the chair, just slightly. You watch his hands. People's hands tell the truth faster than their mouths. His fingers tap once on the table, then stop. You ask him again, calmly, where he was. Now his story changes, but only a little. He says maybe he did go out for coffee. Maybe he did stop by the diner. But he says it was brief. He says he did not meet anyone. He says he was alone. Congratulations. The first crack. You let him talk. You do not pounce. You let him build the new version of the lie, because the new version will have seams. You ask him what he ordered. He hesitates. He says coffee. You ask if he ate. He says no. You ask if he smoked. He says yes, of course. You ask what brand. He tells you, and it matches the cigarette butt from the ashtray. You do not show your reaction. You just write it down. Then you ask him if he knows the missing man. He says no, and the word comes out too sharp. So you shift again. You ask him if the missing man owed money to anyone. Leon leans back like he is offended by the concept of debt. He says he is not a loan shark. He says he is a businessman. He says people borrow money, they pay it back. That is all. He says it like he is explaining the weather. You look around the room, letting your eyes drift, because sometimes people fill silence by talking more. Leon's gaze flicks to the suitcase again, then back to you. He realizes what he did too late. You ask him where he was planning to go? He says nowhere. He says he was just organizing his things. You nod, and you let that sit. In the end, you do not arrest him right there. Not yet. You do not have the missing man. You do not have a body. You do not have a confession. In the real world, you do not always get to close your fist around the truth in one clean motion. What you do have is a man changing his story, a man tied to the missing husband's last known meeting, and a man with a suitcase that looks like it has been waiting for permission. So you do the other boring thing. You put surveillance on him, if you can spare it. You alert patrol units to watch the rooming house. You check if he has a car registered, and if so, what kind, and whether it has a squeaky door. This is the grind. This is the part where the city keeps moving while you try to hold one thread steady. And all the while, you keep building your timeline and your map, because those are the only things that do not get tired. You sit at your desk one more time, and you redraw the timeline in cleaner lines. You add the diner meeting, confirmed. You add the bar sighting, confirmed. You add Leon's shifting alibi. You add the suitcase. Then you look back at the earliest details, the ones from the kitchen, the open back door, the unbroken lock, the wallet empty, cash tin untouched. And you ask yourself, in that quiet way detectives do when they are alone with paper, what was taken that was not money? Sometimes it is pride. Sometimes it is leverage. Sometimes it is something small that fits in a pocket, like a document, a photograph, a note, a key. You go back to the missing wife days later, and you ask her about papers, not cash, not jewelry. Papers? Does her husband keep anything unusual? An envelope? A receipt? A ledger? A note with numbers? She frowns, thinking. She says he had a small notebook, not like yours. Smaller. He kept it hidden, she thinks. He did not want her to see it. She assumed it was work-related. You ask where he hid it? She points to a drawer in the bedroom, the one you saw disturbed. You ask if it is still there. She checks, hands trembling slightly, and she shakes her head. It is gone. Congratulations. You have just learned why the cash tin was untouched. This was not a burglary for money. It was a burglary for information. A ledger, a list of debts, names, amounts, proof. The missing husband had something on someone, or someone had something on him, and that little notebook was the kind of thing that can make a man vanish. Now your case shifts, not to excitement, to clarity. You go back to Leon's rooming house with a warrant, if you can get one, based on the witnesses and the missing notebook. And warrants in this era are their own ritual, paperwork, a judge, a signature, and the slow turn of legal gears. When you finally search Leon's room, you do it with gloves and bags and tags. The evidence room taught you well. You log everything. You photograph it. You keep chain of custody clean. You find cigarettes. You find cash. You find a neat coat. You find a narrow brim hat. And in a drawer, under socks, you find a small notebook. Not proof of murder. Not a confession, but proof of something. Names, numbers, dates. A ledger. You hold it carefully because paper is fragile and because you can feel the weight of what it represents. The missing husband's fear, written down in pencil. The kind of fear that does not go away by ignoring it. You bag it. You tag it. You sign for it. You hand it to the property clerk like you were handing over a live wire. Now, with that ledger, you can do what detectives do best. Follow the money, one dull step at a time. You start visiting the names inside, not all at once, not dramatically. You pick one, the easiest, the one with a known address. You knock. You ask questions. Some deny. Some get angry. Some get scared. One man, seeing his name on that page, turns pale and says he does not know anything about missing husbands, but he would like to pay his debt right now, if that is possible. You tell him it is not your job to collect. It is your job to find a man. He nods too fast. He says, of course. He says he hopes you find him. You write down his reaction. Fear is a fact, even if it is not evidence. Little by little, the ledger gives you a picture of a small network. Not glamorous crime, not movie gangsters, just men lending money at high interest, men paying because they are ashamed, men trying to stay ahead of the next threat. The missing husband got involved, maybe as a borrower, maybe as someone who kept records, maybe as someone who got tired of being squeezed. And Leon, with his neat coat and practiced smile, is only one part of it. That is the deeper truth you start to see. Crime is rarely one man in a room. It is often a chain of ordinary decisions connected by money and ego. And you are still at your desk, still drawing lines on a map, still listening to stories that do not want to be told. Because the next step is the interview room. And before you sit across from Leon under that slow fan, you want every detail in your pocket. You want times, places, witnesses. You want the ledger photographed and logged. You want the waitress ready to identify him again. You want the bar patron's statement written clean and signed. You want to walk into that room with boredom on your side. Because boredom is steady, and steady breaks liars better than anger ever does. So you spend another evening doing the quiet work that makes the loud work possible. You type statements. You file them. You check the chain of custody forms twice. You make sure every signature is where it should be, because paperwork is how cases survive courtrooms. Then, finally, when the station is calm and the hallway echoes are soft, you walk toward that small interview room with a cup of water in your hand and Leon's name on your lips, and the ordinary sound of deception waiting behind a closed door. The knob is cold under your fingers, and the paint on the door frame is worn down to the wood from years of people coming in here to explain themselves. You push the door open, and the room greets you with that familiar, tired air, old plaster, stale smoke, and the faint metal smell of a radiator working too hard. The fan in the corner turns slowly, chopping the silence into soft pieces. A table sits under the light, scuffed and honest. 2 chairs, one for you, one for a man who thinks he can out-talk a clock. Leon is already inside, sitting with his shoulders squared like he is posing for a photograph. His hat is gone, but the scar is there, pale and clean, like a reminder he cannot file away. You set the paper cup of water on the table, not as kindness, but as routine. Routine makes people relax, and relaxed people make mistakes. You do not start with accusations. You start with time. You ask him to tell you his day, in order, from morning to night. He gives you the tired man's version of a schedule. Too neat, too empty. Home. Errands. Home again. Nothing special, nothing memorable. A day that could belong to anyone. You let him finish. You nod once, then you ask him again, slower, about the diner. He says he told you already. He was not there. You let the silence sit between you, like a third person, listening. You reach into your folder and slide a photograph across the table. Not dramatic. Just the plain mugshot, the one that makes everyone look like they have already lost an argument. His eyes flick down and back up. He tries to keep his face neutral, but his jaw tightens, and that is enough. You tell him the waitress pointed to that photograph without hesitation. You tell him she remembers his coat, his hat, his cigarette brand, and the way he paid. Leon gives a small laugh that does not reach his eyes. He says waitresses remember tips, not faces. So you give him something else. You tell him you have the ledger. That word lands heavier than any threat. Ledger. Notebook, paper, ink. Proof that someone wrote things down when they should not have. Leon's hands, resting on the table, shift slightly. One finger taps once and stops, as if he hears himself doing it and hates the sound. You do not rush in. You just watch. In the 1950s, this room does not have magic. It has patience and a light that never flatters. You ask him if he knows whose handwriting is in the ledger. He says he has never seen it. You tell him it was found in his room. He says someone planted it, and there it is, the classic lie dressed in a cheap suit, planted like evidence grows on trees, and cops spend their nights gardening. You do not argue. You ask a simple question, like you are asking about the weather. You ask him why he had a suitcase half packed. Leon leans back, and he spreads his hands a little, like the world is unreasonable. He says he travels for work. He says he was reorganizing. He says a man cannot even pack without being accused of something. You nod as if you accept that, and then you ask where he was planning to travel. He gives you a city name that comes too quickly, like he prepared it. Congratulations. Prepared answers are never comfort. They are armor. And armor tells you where a man expects to be hit. You look down at your notes, then back up at him. You ask him about the missing husband, and you finally use the man's name, clearly, without softening it. Leon says he does not know him, but his eyes shift again, just for a moment, toward the corner of the room, toward nothing. That is another small tell. People glance toward exits, or allies, or imagined witnesses. In this case, he glances toward the idea of someone else. You ask Leon if he lends money. He smiles, the practiced smile of a man who calls a knife a tool. He says he helps people. Short-term loans favor between men. He says the missing husband never borrowed from him. You slide another piece of paper forward. A copy of a page from the ledger, carefully photographed, carefully logged, so no one can claim you invented it. There is the missing husband's name, and next to it, numbers, dates, amounts, notes that sound like threats without using the word. Leon stares at it longer than he should, then looks away as if the paper is hot. He says, anybody can write a name. You agree. Anybody can write a name. That is why you also have witnesses. The waitress, the co-worker, the bar patron, 3 ordinary people, none of them famous, all of them annoyingly consistent. You do not raise your voice. You let the facts pile up like dishes in a sink. Quiet, inevitable, hard to ignore. Leon's story changes again just a little. He says, fine, he met the man, just once, at the diner. Purely business. You ask what business. He says the man wanted a loan. You ask how much. He says he does not remember. In a room like this, that is almost funny. A man who counts money for a living suddenly cannot remember numbers. You tell him you do not need him to remember everything. You just need him to tell you where the missing husband is. Leon's smile fades. His eyes harden. And for a moment, you see the real version of him. Less salesman, more bully. He says he does not know where the man is. He says the man was alive when he last saw him. That phrase, alive when I last saw him, is a strange thing, people say. It sounds like a defense written before an accusation. You ask him when he last saw the missing husband. He says, that night, at the diner. You ask what time. He gives you a range, too wide. You ask where the missing husband went after. Leon shrugs, as if people vanish every day and it is none of his business. And then, softly, you ask Leon about the back door, the one that opened without force. Leon's eyes flick up, startled, and then he tries to hide it, but you saw it, and that is enough to keep pressing. You tell him, calmly, the missing man's wife woke to smoke that did not belong to her home. You tell him a cigarette butt was left behind, the same brand Leon smokes. Leon snorts. He says, half the city smokes that brand. You nod again, because yes, half the city smokes something, and half the city lies about it too. Then you ask him the most boring question in the world. You ask him if he owns a dark sedan. He says no. You ask him if a friend owns one. He hesitates. And that hesitation is the whole point. You do not get a confession that night. Not the clean kind people expect, not the kind that wraps the case in a bow. Instead, you get what real interviews usually give you: an outline of fear, a man who keeps adjusting his story, trying to find the version that fits the evidence. When you end the interview, you do it without ceremony. You stand, you gather your folder, you tell Leon he is not free to leave town. He laughs again, but it is thinner now. And when he stands, you notice something small. His hands tremble, just once. Then steady. Back at your desk, the station feels colder than it did before. Not because the air changed, but because you know more. You sit under the fluorescent lights, and you do what you always do. You write the interview up, line by line, as if you are translating a language nobody wants to admit they speak. Question asked, answer given. Time started, time ended. Demeanor, changes in story. It is dull, and it is sacred. This is the part that survives the courtroom. The next day's drag, slow as wet laundry. You wait on lab work you already know will be late. Fingerprints, if you are lucky, are smudged. Cigarette butts tell you brand, not a name. So you lean on what the 1950s can do well: shoe leather and paperwork. You check Leon's known associates one by one, like turning over stones. You find a friend with a dark sedan. You find a complaint from last year about threats over money. You find a pattern that does not scream. It just hums, low and steady, like the fan in the interview room. And then, finally, the case gives you something solid. A patrol unit calls in a vehicle found abandoned near the edge of the river, down where the city stops pretending it is clean. You drive out there with the early morning haze hanging low. The air smells like wet dirt and old trash, and the water moves slow, carrying little bits of nothing downstream. The car is dark, heavy, and it sits at an angle like it got tired and gave up. The door, when you open it, gives a faint squeak. Congratulations. The sound the neighbor heard is now a thing you can point to. Inside the car, you find small, ordinary traces. A cigarette ash smudge on the window ledge, a faint scuff on the floor mat, and in the back seat, wedged between the cushion and the frame, you find something you almost miss. A small button torn off a shirt, plain and cheap. You bag it, you tag it, you do not celebrate, because you learned better than that. A button is not a body, but it is a breadcrumb, and breadcrumbs do not appear by accident. The riverbank search is slow and miserable. Men with flashlights walking in lines, boots sinking into mud, radios hissing quietly. And then, downstream, someone calls out, not shouting, just a firm voice that says the world has changed again. What you find is not cinematic. It never is. It is a man half hidden by reeds, clothes dark with river water. The face is turned away, but the shape of him is enough. You stand there, and the morning light is too pale to feel real. The smell is wrong, sweet and sour, the kind that makes you breathe through your mouth. A coroner's man arrives, slow and professional. He checks pockets, he notes position, he notes lividity, the blood pooling that tells you how the body has been lying. Lividity sounds like a fancy word. It is just the body leaving you a map. The missing husband's wallet is gone. But in his shirt, one button is missing. The button you found in the car answers that, quietly. Cause of death takes time to confirm. but you can see enough to know it was not natural. No dramatic shootout, no heroic struggle, just a man who lost an argument with someone who did not mind going further. Back at the station, the case turns from missing person to homicide. That change is a stamp on paper, a new form, a different set of rules. And, as always, the city does not pause. Phones keep ringing, officers keep walking in with new reports. You notify the wife, because that is part of the job they never teach you to do, gently. You sit in her living room, and the curtains are drawn even though it is daytime. You tell her what you found, in plain words. She makes a sound like the air left her, and then she goes very still. You do not stay long. Grief is private, and police work is an intrusion even when it is necessary. Now you have enough to tighten the net. Leon's lies matter more because the missing man is not missing anymore. You bring Leon back in. Same room, same fan, same table. This time you do not need to raise your voice. You have the car, you have the squeak, you have the button, you have witnesses. You lay the facts out again, and Leon watches them stack up. His confidence drains slowly, like coffee cooling. He still does not confess cleanly. Most men do not. Instead, he tries to bargain with reality. He says it was not supposed to happen like that. That is an important phrase. Not supposed to. He says the missing husband owed money and he wanted proof destroyed. He says they met, they argued, the man got stubborn. He says there was a struggle near the river and the man fell, hit his head. He says he panicked. You listen without reacting too much, because in this job, even a confession is just another statement that has to be verified. But you have enough now to move the case forward. An arrest is paperwork. A booking is paperwork. Evidence submission is paperwork. And court, later, will be paperwork with nicer chairs. The good news is, the case closes in a way that makes sense. The bad news is, it does not fix anything. The missing husband is still dead. The wife still goes home to a house where the kitchen light feels haunted. Leon becomes another file, another photograph, another name typed onto a form. The city will forget him faster than he thinks. Weeks later, when the court dates begin, you sit in the back sometimes, listening. The prosecutor speaks in clean lines, trying to turn a messy night into a story a jury can follow. The defense tries to poke holes in your chain of custody. Who touched the notebook? Who logged the cigarette? Who bagged the button? That is why you checked the signatures twice. That is why you wrote the report like a map. The jury hears about the diner, the bar, the ledger, the car by the river. They hear it all in daylight with polished shoes and quiet coughs. And you sit there thinking, as you often do, about how boring the truth is compared to what people expect. A man borrowed money. A man kept notes. Another man wanted those notes gone. No genius, no grand plan, just ego and fear, and the lazy belief that time would erase consequences. When the verdict comes, it is not a thunderclap. It is a clerk reading words off paper. Guilty or not guilty, those syllables land like stamps. The case file gets updated, the box in the evidence room stays on its shelf, and then the station moves on. You return to your desk, and there is always another folder waiting, another address, another argument, Another door that did not stay locked. You learn what solved really means in this work. Sometimes it means a name and a sentence and a reason. Sometimes it just means the best answer you could build from tired witnesses and fragile evidence. Sometimes it means you stop the bleeding even if you cannot heal the wound. On certain nights, later, you catch yourself checking your own back door twice. You catch yourself noticing cigarette smoke in places it should not be. You carry stories home in quiet ways, in silence, in extra locks, in the way you listen to a house settling. And when the station lights dim and the last typewriter stops, the building feels like it exhales. You stack the paperwork neatly because the next shift will inherit whatever you did not finish. You step outside again into Los Angeles night, the streets glossy under streetlights. A bus sighs at the curb. A diner glows in the distance, still serving coffee to the sleepless. The city keeps going because it always does. People laugh, argue, fall in love, and make the same small mistakes. And you, weary and steady, keep walking behind them, listening for the one